And today we're sitting with a woman whose work sits at the heart of social justice in West Africa. Fondly called Dr. Chichi. I heard she doesn't bother with all the full titles and everything, but fondly called Dr. Chichi. She is the regional director at the Ford Foundation, and she spent several years working alongside communities and strengthening civil society ecosystems and pushing for systems that honor dignity, equity, and human rights. Now, today is not just about titles and institutions, it's also about the human journey. And that's the journey behind the work, the moments that shape conversations, conviction, and the challenges that test resolve and the quiet resilience that keeps leaders standing long after the applause has faded. So, we're going to look at 3 or 4 areas. We're going to talk about her personal leadership journey, what resilience looks like in movements, the deeper work of advocacy and coalition building, and also the lessons that will shape the next generation of movement builders. So we're going to breathe together and then learn from a woman who contributes to shaping the landscape of justice in our region. So once again, Dr. Chichi, welcome. Thank you very much for having me. All right, so this is exciting for me actually because I followed her journey for a while, and I've worked with a number of organizations in the civil society space, and the Ford Foundation supports a lot of them. But your name typically always comes up as someone who is a backbone, who helps to put everything together. And it's not easy to do all of that. So let's start from looking back. You know, they say if you want to know where you're going, sort of look at where you're coming from. And so, in looking back, what are the experiences that have most shaped your commitment to social justice and community empowerment? Thank you so much. Really wonderful to be here. I appreciate being invited to this. I don't think that I don't see myself as a social movement person. There are people who have been in the trenches and who I think, are a better place to talk about this. I'm really honored that you have decided that I should be the one having this conversation with you, so I don't take it for granted. Thank you very much. I think for me, social justice work started very early, and of course, I didn't think of it as social justice work because I didn't know the terminologies there. But something that happened when I was a kid was watching Roots. Did anybody see Roots? The story, Kunta Kinte and the journey, and that really awakened something inside of me. Of course, I had known the story of, slave trade and the rest of it. But as a young girl, watching this movie and seeing how much Black people had suffered for nothing other than the color of their skin, it really did something to me. And I think that was where the fire was lit. And I have to also say that closer home, two things that happened, personally. One is, for some reason, in school, I was always being punished for things I didn't do. I don't know why. People will be making noise. I'll stay as quiet as a mouse and they'll flog me. And I could never understand it. And it just burnt inside of me. And I felt this desire to protect people, who are unjustly treated. And then the second one was the way we treat domestic workers in Nigeria. And I have to say that some of that treatment I saw in my own family, where domestic servants were not treated, as equal to the rest of the family. That really bored a hole in me, and still does. Today my siblings call the people who work in my house civil servants because, they go on leave, they close at 7, I have structure. I have structure for them. And I think that it has paid off for me because there's nobody who's living in my house that has lived with me for less than 15 years. Wow. So I treat them in the same, because that thing has always burnt inside of me that domestic servants, are actually the backbone of the people. They're the ones who make it possible for me to be here and to do what you do. Because if I didn't have someone, I would have to be home with my daughter and the rest of it. So the way they've been treated and that image had stayed with me. And those are the things that, for me, shaped my journey and my desire to protect the vulnerable. Well said. Thank you so much. And it's interesting you talk about that because the description of your domestic servants are it's the care economy. And I've had a number of conversations in recent time about how the care economy powers the economy before the economy wakes up, before the economy starts moving. And it's really interesting that you took notice of that. And I think it's something a lot more Nigerians need to take notice of because, again, even me, it's my nanny that allows me here to be here today. It's a husband who's involved that allows me to be able to fly free, you know, and it's really important that we look at that. So when we go to leadership, particularly in terms of you've had a streak. You've had a streak of good times, good years, accomplishments, and seeing programs you put into place take off and have impact. But you cannot. But nobody can be a leader without their resolve or their resilience being tested. So let's talk about challenges in leadership that have tested your resilience, and how did they influence also your approach to advocacy?
So I think for me, I think the major challenge and something that I think that I have had to overcome myself has been improving my communication and being able to prioritize my team. I see myself as a really, hardworking and effective leader. I want results. I want things done. And I find that sometimes, I'm running much faster than the team. And while I thought to myself that this was something that to be applauded, I'm doing well, I want everybody to get to where I want to be. But I've come to learn that this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And you have to carry people along. And you have to carry your team along, especially. And the way you do that is how you communicate with people. Sometimes how you communicate is more important than what it is that you're actually saying. And it took me a while to learn that. I'm a very blunt person. I'm learning it. I'm trying, because I've always believed, your truth will set you free, but it's how you say the truth that will set you free. So I've come to learn, and my boss told me something that stayed with me. He said, when you work with people, you need to recognize that they're always looking for shortcuts. And if you don't know how to talk to people, they will focus on how you talk to people as opposed to what it is that you're saying to them. And that allows them to not focus on what you're saying. And so if it's reported to a higher authority, it will be, this is how she said it. And the essence of what you're saying is then lost because everybody is then focused on how you said it. So that for me has become a really big lesson, that I have to learn not just what to say, but how to say it, so that you continue to motivate people, so that you continue to, have people committed to the cause. Because I think that many things, people who are leaders of movements are so emotionally connected to it. And they expect everyone to be like that and everyone to be at that stage. But they forget that they too had gone through a journey to get to where they are. And they forget that. And so it's something that is paramount for me, that I have to try and remember that, yes, I know why I am motivated. And my job is to pass that on to the people. So I remember once I was working for an organization, and the accountant was always very slow in paying people, and I'll go to her and say, these people really need this money, they need to go there. And she'll be like, oh yeah, and I would get so upset because I could understand what they were doing and why they were doing it. And one day it just occurred to me, I said, the only reason I'm pushing for this organization is because I know what they're doing. The only reason she is not pushing for this organization is because she doesn't know what they're doing. So I said, okay, she's going to go visit the partners. And that's not normal. Accountants don't go to visit partners. To me, they stay at the back door. I said, no, she needs to go because she needs to be able to understand that what she's doing is affecting the work. And so she went. Oh my God. By the time I think she only went to 3 or 4. When she came back, Madam, you have to sign this thing very quickly. These people need, And so she suddenly became even more connected to the
And
work
in tune,
and in
yes.
tune. And so for me, that's really what we need to do as leaders. We need to make sure that everyone is carried along, that everyone understands the vision, and that everyone is given the opportunity, not just by talking to them, but to also demonstrating to them why it is important, why the work we're doing is important, and why and how what they're doing
Plays
is
into
also
it. It's part of it.
exactly.
Please, I know that story resonated with a few people. If it resonated with you, please raise your hand. It really, I don't know whether you're on the manager, leader side of it, or you're on the maybe not subordinate, but colleague side of it. And we all think back to the fact that oftentimes we're not always carried along on the mission and the vision of whoever we're working for. And when we are carried along, we can key in. I think that's really what it is. It's about leaders making sure that their team members are able to key in to this journey that they're on. But also we lead Nigerian people. So that's a different part of the conversation, Dr. Chichi. All right, let's keep this going. So how do you maintain focus and sustain hope in spaces where social development work is exhausting and risky? I was having our tea break with Tosin Adeyemi, who's going to grace us here, and we were talking about how people in the social justice space, I was asking, I don't know how they do it. Because I've covered this space almost 20 years now, and while there have been improvements, it's like the needle is moving very slowly. And I wouldn't know how I would wake up day in and day out and feel like you see minute progress, but you're looking for the bigger picture progress. So how do you sustain hope in those kind of situations?
I think you sustain hope by being realistic and to invest in those small wins and to recognize those wins as you go along, because sometimes we don't even know that we have won. We're so focused on the big picture that we don't realize that we have actually won. And so it's to look at the journey in a way that shows incremental steps. Like I said, it's a sprint, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And so if you realize that the change you want to see is about, yes, it's a big picture. We want, women's rights recognized and the rest of it. But when a mother is able to say, my son is not more important than my daughter, that's a major win. It's a win that we don't recognize because it's not a law, it's not a bill. But that change is so significant in the way people think and what the implications will be for women going forward, that many times we are not prioritizing it. So I think that what we need to do, and what I try to do, is to say, what is it that we are trying to achieve? And what are the wins along the way
That build to
that, so that you can encourage yourself and your team. And it is also okay to celebrate the failures, because these failures are the things that also help build you for the future. Many times we feel that, let's not talk about the failures. Let's minimize them. But no, if you have a conversation with your team and you say, why didn't we achieve this? What's going on? And with everyone, and I'm just talking about the three people who are in the leadership position, but with everyone, you will be in a position to understand what went wrong, who you didn't carry along, who should have been part of the team, and so on. And so I find that with my team, for example, we have young people, we have older people, and I make sure that everyone speaks, because, with my age, I might be looking at a problem very differently from the way, the young person in my organization is looking at it. But if you don't give her the space, because she's never going to speak up because, she's worried, there's regional directors there, whatever. But if I call out to her and say, I want to hear what you have to say, and that you have to do that. And that's what builds hope, because you may not have known that this is a win. She's young and you're seeing, this didn't work. But from her young eyes, she's seeing so many things that are changing her world, but you would not have known it. So it's making sure that everyone in the team is carried along, is given a role, and it's part of the celebration and the loss. But most of all, like I said, make sure that you're able to itemize the wins so that people can celebrate the little things, the big things, And I find that we don't do that well in civil society. I'm sorry, I'm emphasizing too much on this, because many times when we go to our partners and we say, oh, we want you to tell us what it is that you have achieved. And many times they're looking at the law, they're looking at this. And in listening to their story, there is so much that they've done that they're not even aware of. They don't even recognize that these are wins. So I think it's also important to run these by people who are not part of your team, to say, this is what we have done. What do you see as the achievements that we have made? And that way you'll be surprised by how much people know that you have actually achieved.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. So let's look at the resilience in movements now. So movements don't succeed by passion alone. They succeed through resilience. And that means they have to overcome, withstand backlash, fatigue, and even moments of deep disappointment. And in particular in West Africa, we've seen civic spaces fluctuate and political resistance is real. Collective resilience also then becomes a survival strategy and a catalyst for progress. So what does resilience look like at a collective level within social movements?
I think that is the heart of social movements. We have to understand that we are part of a whole, not the whole. So a TECHA is connected to a Yaradua Foundation, and a Yaradua Foundation is connected to an accountability lab and the rest of it. Until we begin to see ourselves as part of a whole, we will not be able to realize the potential of a social movement. And so the first thing is to say, what is my role in this bigger picture? And it is that bigger picture that you need to focus on. If you look at the civil rights movement, or you look at the anti-apartheid movement, it was able to mobilize everyone. The artist, the musician was able to sing about it. They found their role. The academics could do the research around it. The civil actors could do the matching. The people in South Africa themselves, could mobilize. The business people could impose the sanctions. There was a role for everyone. And that, for me, is really what makes a social movement resilient. It has to be something that has mass appeal. You've got to be able to break down what it is that you're doing in a way that resonates with a large group of people. If we look at our End SARS movement in Nigeria, the reason it was successful in mobilizing was because it was touching an issue that affected everyone, every young person, whether you are the child of a rich person or you are an Okada rider. Police harassed everyone. And so it was an issue that resonated with everyone. So if you're not able to get an issue that resonates with everyone, it will be difficult to sustain a social movement. You also need to be able to identify who are the partners, who are the people who should be a part of it. And for us, I think in civil society, we have become so closed. Everything has to be NGOs. But I think we need to recognize that sometimes we need musicians, and sometimes we need, artists, and sometimes we need academics and people who may not necessarily be part of our team. And that's also what sustains social movements. But we also have to be organized. We need to have a plan. You need to have a big vision. There needs to be a vision that everyone is keying into. I'm always, in Ford, we keep talking about the cohorts, trying to get people to work in cohorts, because that's so important. Because when you work in cohorts, you'll be able to recognize what each person brings to the table. So we're trying to prevent gender-based violence. That's one of the areas in which we are working on. And we have some people who are working, with leaders of faith and culture. We have leaders of faith and culture themselves, trying to change things from within. We have people who are working with men, trying to transform, the way men think. We have people working with young people. We have people. So there's a whole group of people, but everybody is working on their own to create a social movement, because all those people are being funded to do one thing: to prevent gender-based violence in order to end gender-based violence. So everybody's role is important. But we have to be able to put it together to be able to know when we are making progress and how we're making progress and how one person's work is connected to the other, and if you look at the civil rights movement, I mean, it was absolutely brilliant. Or even the women's movement, because this is a women's, let's look at the women's movement. The first thing that women did, and that's also why I always say to people, you have to have a chronological approach to what you want to achieve. There needs to be something you need to achieve first, and then the next, and then and everybody needs to mobilize around that first. And I loved it with the HIV/AIDS work, because when they first started, everything was awareness creation. Everyone came together for awareness creation. That's what we did. And as the awareness grew, and then we suddenly realized, okay, this is now there is a need for stigma and discrimination to be addressed. Then people moved. Of course, some people still stayed in awareness creation because that will always be relevant. But then the next stage of it was, stigma and discrimination. And there was a lot of effort being put to that. And then there was making sure that there was access to drugs, for people with HIV. And then there was, ensuring that there was mother to child transition. So you could see that there was, there was a sequence. Exactly. There was a roadmap. And that's what I think that many of our movements are lacking. The women's movement was the same thing. After the World War II, when women had to go into the labor force to take up the job because the men had gone to war. When the men came back, women were fired, and had to go back home. And they were like, hell no, we're not doing that. They had seen the independence that comes with their own money. And so the movement at the time was getting women to work, and everybody was focused on that. That was not the time to talk about, there are many issues that women were facing. But the existential issue at the time was allowing women to work. What's happening today in our movement is that everybody is talking about so many things at the same time that we no longer have a single thing that we are focusing on and that we need to end before we go to the next thing. When women fought the battle and won about going to work, the next thing was the suffragette. Women had to be allowed to vote. And from that was equality. So we need to be able to find what is it in our time now? What is that big main issue that can connect everyone? That young people and old people and, can resonate around the women's movement that will make it possible for us to know when we have actually won.
So it's a conversation about building blocks, a roadmap, and then cohesion as well, making sure that everyone is aligned. I've learned big words.
Yes.
So those words are the key words in some of these conversations. Yeah. But when we talk about all of that, it is a process.
Yes.
And it can take longer than you want it to. If you could wake up today, let's talk about the sexual harassment prohibition and something bill. If I could wake up today and have President Tinubu sign it today, everybody be happy. We have those things we want done immediately, but we're looking at things that are going to take time. So how do movements build a culture that protects their members from burnouts while also maintaining impact and even to some point a level of momentum?
Okay. So I think for me, it's important to have the good big wins, like I said, but it's also important to recognize the small wins. So you are trying to get the president to sign a bill. Is that going to end gender-based violence if he signs the bill?
It's a step towards.
Is that going to end gender-based violence if he signs the bill? No. But it's an important step.
Yes.
So it means that there are so many other things that we need to be doing at the same time. So burnout happens when you are focused on things and you don't have a structure and you don't have a broad base of activism around it. That's not to say that even if you have all that you will not have burnout. But what you do is that you ensure that everybody recognizes that it is not just you. You have to prioritize your team. You have to let people take the time off. It's okay, even if you are the movement leader, it's okay to be tired. It's okay to take a rest because it is a marathon, not a sprint. It is okay to say yes. Let's evaluate our wins. Let's take the time. Let's take a rest. That's okay. But I think that what causes burnout a lot is when we think that it is just us that have to do it. It is, so we need to find how do we expand our partnerships and our support. I'll give you an example. It's a little far-fetched, but I think it's important here. I'm on the board of an NGO that was trying to get the commissioner for a state to approve something for them. They had written letters. They had done everything. They were so frustrated with this. And so I went to the state and I visited the vice chancellor of one of the universities, on something completely different. And I just thought, well, why not ask this guy, if he knows this commissioner and if he can help. And so I mentioned it to him. And he said, the commissioner. Oh, hold on, let me call him. He picks up the phone, calls the commissioner and tells him, come here. And the commissioner comes. This is the vice chancellor, this is commissioner. And the commissioner comes. He said, oh, these people said they've been having difficulties with you. He said, oh, no. He said, okay, whatever it is they need, please support them. And that was it. That was it. I'm a sociologist, and I call these things sociological moments. It was a sociological moment for me because I realized that if we did a power mapping, that vice chancellor would not have been in it.
At all.
At all.
At all.
And so it made me realize that we need to understand the communities where we are. We need to really know who holds power, who can make things quick and easy. And sometimes it is not the people that we think, the people with the vested authority. Sometimes it's someone. But if you do the right mapping, we'll be able to find them. I also had another sociological moment when we had the coup in Niger, and the Nigerian government was trying to reach out to them and couldn't. But who was able to? The traditional rulers. The Emir of Kano was able to meet with the new president of Niger, before the government of Nigeria was able to do it. And so burnout happens when we don't know where the entry points are. So our job is to be able to say, who are the power holders? Who can help me shift what I am looking for? And it is not always in the right places.
It's so instructive because I think it's also an opportunity where many of us, particularly Nigerians, we tend to underestimate people's reach or even people's connections. And this country is a country that shows you that there are silent power brokers moving and shaking things up behind the scenes. And that was a prime example of that. Let's one just final question on this in terms of, and I like the example you used of the Emir and the Niger situation, because in the context of political and social pushback, which happens a lot, not just in the West Africa region, but also across the continent, how can movements adapt without losing their core vision? Because there's either a new government comes in that's maybe not as friendly or has a listening ear to the particular issue you want to put on board, or it's a new governor. It's just so many things that can either destabilize the, let's say, the roadmap to that vision you've had, or even the players who are on the board. Before you know it, someone's removed and it changes the whole game. So how do we have adaptation sort of built into the movement so that they don't get lost when changes occur, when political and social resistance becomes larger than they anticipated?
That's an excellent question, because for me, that is at the heart of social movement and the challenges they face. If something is really a social movement, then the people are connected to it. And the people are the reason for the social movement, not the NGO.
Yeah.
Because many times we kind of forget. We ask ourselves, we're trying to achieve things that we're not carrying the people along. If we take the example of the apartheid movement, what difference did it make that governments were changing in South Africa? Did it in any way affect the social movement? It didn't. The anti-apartheid movement stayed. It didn't matter whether it was P.W. Botha that was in charge or whoever was in power. The movement kept on. And the reason the movement kept on was the things I talked about before. It was broad-based. It carried people along. It was intergenerational. It had mass appeal. And it was focused on the social justice that people could relate to. Is your movement doing that? Because if your movement is doing that, it doesn't matter whether the governor changes. The people will still be saying this is what it is that we want. But we have moved from being social movement to being NGOs. And that's what we need to change. We need to carry the people along. We need to move beyond, our workshops to say, how do we connect to the people? Not a very good example, but I say to myself, if we look at what some of the social media influencers are doing and the change they're able to get compared to what we have been doing for years, we find that they're bringing a different type of appeal that we need to learn from. We're not saying that their methodology is best, but we need to learn from that. We need to say, maybe it's time for us to look at how we're engaging with communities. Maybe it's time for us to look at what are the issues that we're actually emphasizing. Because sometimes you need to go north to be able to arrive south. And I give you an example. So, for example, we're trying to end gender-based violence. And one of the things that we're looking at is, girls in northern Nigeria and the early marriage. And we met with the Sultan, and he said, this is a very emotive issue in northern Nigeria. If you come and talk about age, and talk about girls not marrying at a young age, you will hit a brick wall. But if you talk about girls staying in school to finish their secondary school, most people can relate to that. And it's not going to be as contentious as you're talking about girls and the age of marriage. Yes. But you achieve the same thing. Because if the child stays in school till the end of secondary school, they'll be 16, 17, 18 anyway. So why take the route that will keep you fighting and achieving very little and creating burnout, as opposed to saying, what do I need to move the needle in this community? What are the things that I need to say to be able to achieve what I want to do? And that's not to say that you become untrue to your, to your vision. What it says is that you're being pragmatic and you're being realistic, and ultimately you're going to be able to achieve the goal that you want. So I think for me, those are the important lessons that we need to learn. I also, in northern Nigeria, in another job where I was asking a young lady. I was asking my team at the time and said, we've been going on and on about girls' education for so many years. I cannot believe that there isn't a way out of this. We've done this for so long. And because I was asking the whole team and not just the leadership team, somebody raised their hand and said, Madam, if you really want girls' education to improve in northern Nigeria, you have to engage the grandmothers. The grandmothers, nobody has ever said that. He said, yes, because in Islam it says, honor your mother, honor your mother, honor your mother, then your father. And the way it has been translated in northern Nigeria is that everything that has to do with the girl child is now the grandmother determines everything that's going to happen to the girl child. So if the grandmother says she's getting married tomorrow, the girl gets married. If the grandmother says the girl stays in school, the girl stays in school. I was speechless. I have been doing this work for, I don't know for how long. Nobody had ever said this, ever. And so by engaging grandmothers, we're going to be in a position now to actually get the people who are going to influence whether she stays in school or not. But who have we been talking to before? Emirs, community leaders, government officials. And when we went to see the Kaduna state, we had a meeting in Kaduna state, and the commissioner at the time, the director of education at the time said, and I mentioned it to him, and he said, to be honest with you, even as educated as I am, if my mother wakes up tomorrow and says my daughter is getting married, she's getting married. And so we have a lot of work to do in terms of ensuring that we actually understand where we are, and who is the mover and the shaker. Yes. And sometimes it is the emir, sometimes it is the grandmother. So the question is, who is the grandmother of your program?
So, you talked about power mapping and you used the VC story. This is yet another example because grandmothers would not have been on that power map.
Yes.
And it makes me think of a Yoruba adage, "Onakon Owoja," and that literally translates to, it's not one way we take to the market. So if you look at the market as your vision, it's not one way to accomplish that vision. This story is very powerful, Dr. Chichi. All right, so let's talk advocacy now, and that's about advocacy and movement building. So advocacy is both strategy and spirit. It is a long-term practice of insisting on justice even when institutions, I'll also put the people, sometimes resist change. And movements rise and fall on their ability to include diverse voices, collaborate authentically, and speak in ways that resonate beyond their generation. And I think almost every answer you've given us has shown that in just the past few minutes in which we've been speaking. So let's talk about the essential elements of movements. So what do you think are the essential elements of movements that remain influential across time and generations? And I think you started answering that with the examples of apartheid and the race movement, the civil rights movement. Thank you so much. The civil rights movement in the US. You've given us. So let's just bring all of that together for a quick overview on that.
Okay. So I think for me, I think this has stopped working. Did I turn it off?
Yeah, just take this.
Okay. So I think for me, the first thing, like I said, is making sure that your movement connects with the people. There's no way around it. You need to understand what actually makes what do the people need? Because I think sometimes we end up doing what we want to do,
Or what we think.
or what we think that the people want. So that's number one. It has to have a vision. It has to have a clear vision of what it is that it's trying to achieve. And that clear vision has to be continuously communicated to the people. I think that the NSAS movement, for example, kind of lost it along the way when it went from one goal to 19 or 20 asks. When it was just end SARS, it was clear. When it we now said, okay, they now added another 20. I mean, it's lost that vision. So it's important to stay. If it's one or two or three visions, you keep to that vision and you stay on it. It's important that it is broad-based, like I said, so that you are using different mechanisms to reach different people. Some people understand things through academic research and really structured information. Others, it is music. Others, it is drama. For others, it is workshops and marching. So you've got to make sure that you're using a broad base. So that's another important thing. How broad-based is your movement? I think it's also important to stay.
Stay the course. To
stay. And I know that it's easy to say because you're like, okay, where's the funding going to come from? But staying is extremely important. The anti-apartheid movement didn't end after 5 years. People say, okay, well, the Afrikaans are never leaving South Africa. Let's leave it and let's look at how to manage working with them. No, the goal was ending apartheid. Mandela was told to compromise. He could be brought out if he stopped. He said, no, the goal is ending apartheid. It even got to a stage where people were like, this is never going to happen. So why are you focusing on this, pipe dream? Why don't we try and find things that we can, manage? Maybe black people could be given 3 seats in the parliament or 5 seats or whatever. No, the goal is ending apartheid. And it took 28 years of prison time to be able to do that. But apartheid ended. So we have to think about that and to say we have to have the vision and we have to stay with the vision. But we have to also have a structure. If you look at the civil rights movement and how organized it was, it's unbelievable. There's a movie on Netflix that I'll ask everybody to watch. What's the title of this? Oh Jesus, I'll remember it. Okay. It was by one of the biggest organizers of the 1 million man march to Capitol Hill. That really transformed the movement. the structure, the organizing. I didn't, you watch TV and then you see when people are being hosed down, screamed at, dogs are at them. I didn't know they practice all that.
Yeah.
They actually do. Not, I mean, they say to them, so what are you going to do when this happens? Because it was supposed to be a non-violent movement. So they had to practice every type of intimidation that the police was going to do. And that's how they were able to stay so calm, because they rehearsed everything. And there was everybody involved. It was not an issue of saying, oh, this is something that it's only black people who are involved in it, so we're only going to have black people, and we won't let other people come on board. There were whites, there were Jews, there were all sorts of people. Of course, majority were black people, but it was broad based. So that's, for me, is also really important. It has to be intergenerational, because as movements, like we say, it takes a long time, and so you have to be able to bring on younger people. So the movement needs to resonate with young people. It doesn't mean that today we're still looking at suffragette movement because women are allowed to vote. But the feminist movement hasn't died, because the issues have metamorphosized. And younger people are able to identify with it, because the issues that, because some of the issues still exist and affect them. So it has to be intergenerational. And I think for me, finally, it also has to, of course, be resourced. And that's where the stickiness comes. But a social movement, for me, that is not resourced by the people, has to go back to the drawing board. I say to people, the time that civil society organizations will know that they have arrived and have really become social movements when they become like churches or mosques. And what happens in churches? People bring themselves to churches. Nobody pays anybody to go to church. People go to church. Not only do they take themselves to church, they contribute to the church. And when I say church, I also mean the mosques, And why is that? Because there is an emotional connection to the church. There is hope that has been built in the message of the church. There is a sense of obligation that people have been ingrained with. And these are the things that we have to try as social movement to say. It's only when we become like churches that we know that we are really resonating. The day ordinary people begin to come to your organization and say, this is a piece of yam. I know that I don't have anything else, but what you're doing for us is really good, And I think there are people who are doing it brekete. I think, has kind of found, that's not to say they don't have their issues, but in terms of that connectedness, we need to be able to ensure that we connect to the people to a level where they see us the way they see their church or their religious institution.
Thank you so much for that. We're getting close to wrapping up, but I do still have a few more questions. And this next question looks at inclusivity, particularly for diverse women whose experiences of advocacy differ. So how do movements ensure that inclusivity? I was speaking with the executive director, Chioma, this morning, and we met Dr. Stella, and she was talking to us about how women living with disabilities are affected by gender-based violence. And many times we don't hear that perspective. Then Chioma also talked about how people living with disabilities, their experiences online are even worse. And then there's technology-facilitated gender-based violence that's happening online that tends to affect women with disabilities even more. So even within the space of fighting for women, you have demographic differences, which you sort of have to attend to in either ensuring that the message is inclusive or ensuring that their own experiences are, it's again, the intersection of all of it, that their own experiences are part and parcel of the work that you're doing. So how do we ensure that inclusivity? Because women are not a monolith. There are different experiences, there are different types of women. There are women living with certain things that must be part of the fight for women that we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, it is a big challenge, and it is one that we have to overcome. And for me, what I do is that I always say, what is the goal? I work from the goal backwards. I don't go from activity to the goal. I go to the goal and say, this is what I want to achieve. And who do I need to be able to achieve that? And when we say inclusivity, I think sometimes we've also taken it to the other extreme. Not everyone needs to be included in every single initiative.
I think you might want to repeat that for people at the back.
I said not everyone needs to be included in every single initiative. So it is from the goal. And I'll give you an example. And it's one that many of you here probably will resonate. You know, when we were designing our gender-based program work, and it was originally, before I came on board, it was originally designed from activity to goal. And so when I came on board and I was like, okay, what are we trying to achieve? Are we trying to achieve gender-based violence programming? Or are we trying to end gender-based violence? They do seem like they're the same thing, but they're not. Gender-based programming means that you are prioritizing the organizations that have been doing gender-based violence and you're funding them to keep doing the advocacy. Ending gender-based violence means that you are looking at the goal and then saying, who do I need to be able to end it? It will include gender-based organizations, but you will need new actors. So when we looked at it and we said, who are the power brokers and how do we end gender-based violence? And what is it that is really at the core of gender-based violence? And then we had to then look at things like social norms, patriarchy, the way religious and cultural institutions construct and deconstruct gender. And we say, okay, is this something that only women's groups can achieve? And it became quite clear to the consternation of women's groups, I have to say, to say we can't only focus on women's groups if we want to end gender-based violence. We can focus on only women's groups if we want to do gender-based violence programming. And so we started reaching out to churches, to mosques, to, and actually put them at the center of their work. It did not take away the women's groups, but we now realize they have a role, but it can't be the only role. You know what I mean? And so now we are working with leaders of faith and culture. We're working with the Anglican Church. We're working with the Catholic Church. We're working with Muslim groups who are now challenging the texts, challenging the construction of gender. Those things that are at the heart. We're now having, bishops coming up and saying, if you are going to, if you are in a abusive relationship, please leave. As opposed to saying God will come and solve the problem and whatever. The language is changing. It's beginning to change. And that's what we need to do. And that for me is at the heart of it. That's how we ensure that we are carrying everybody, along. That's how we become inclusive. Because at the end of the day, it's not just the It's not just the traditional rulers. We have to keep looking. Who are those people that we need? And like I said, sometimes you may find that there are people who think that they are central to a problem, but who are not the solution to that problem. One phone call from someone can make a difference, even if they're not necessarily the ones who are the biggest, who are
the biggest
victims of it. Of course, victims have to be central, but sometimes the victims need to understand, I'm not the solution to my victimhood. And so we need to be broad-based and we need to be clear in what it is we're trying to achieve and really understand who we need to be able to help solve the problem.
All right, because of time, I know we have a number of activities. Dr. Chichi, I'll just ask you to answer this in just 2 minutes, because we've done from you to advocacy and movement building, but we also need to talk about the future and what we see ahead of us. So when we talked about moving the needle and progress being slow sometimes and even fragile, what gives you hope in this work that your commitment and the work being done by you and other organizations will succeed? And then also, what is the one principle about resilience and advocacy that you would want emerging movement builders in West Africa to carry forward? 2 minutes.
Okay, so let me start with the other one. I think the message for me is it's not a
Sprint?
it's not a sprint.
It's a marathon.
It's a marathon. So if we have that at the back of our mind, we know that we're in it for the long haul. In terms of what gives me hope, looking at this room, looking at social media, and how many young women, are speaking up, how many young women are owning their space, how much gender-based violence has shifted from victim blaming to really,
shame must change sides.
exactly. I mean, I look at some of the posts when a woman, is being molested or whatever by their partner, and how much the language has changed. People are like, get out of that place. Why? What are you doing there? You will hardly see anyone now saying, that's what comes with marriage, whatever. So that's what gives me hope. It gives me hope that even though people can't, advocacy is not tangible. We're not able to always say, oh, these are the things. But that change in narrative, that change in behavior is ultimately what's going to result in in the difference we want to see. And that's happening, and that's giving me hope.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chichi. Thank you for your honesty, your depth, and your generosity in sharing your experience. Ladies and gentlemen, please a round of applause for her. Dr. Chichi, the Regional Director for the Ford Foundation for West Africa. Please, let's keep the round of applause going. We don't often get to hear from her at this level and sharing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.